Elena Martinez had been working as a maid in the Grand Blackwood mansion for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. She counted every single day because each one brought her closer to saving enough money to return to her home country of Colombia and reunite with her elderly mother. The mansion belonged to Alexander Blackwood, a billionaire businessman who owned a chain of luxury hotels across Europe and North America. People in the small town of Millbrook called him the Night King because of his mysterious nature and the way he conducted most of his business dealings after dark. Elena had only seen Mr. Blackwood a handful of times during her employment. He was a tall, imposing man in his early 30s, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through people. Most of the staff whispered that he was cold and ruthless, but Elena had never had any direct interaction with him to form her own opinion. She worked the night shift, cleaning the east wing of the massive estate while the family slept. What nobody knew, not even her closest friend Maria, who worked in the kitchen, was that Elena was carrying a secret that could change everything. 4 months ago, during a staff party celebrating the mansion's anniversary, Elena had too much wine and ended up in a situation she never could have imagined. She woke up the next morning in one of the guest rooms with fragmented memories and a terrible headache. The only thing she remembered clearly was a pair of blue eyes and gentle hands that contrasted sharply with the cold reputation of the man she believed them to belong to. When Elena discovered she was pregnant weeks later, she was terrified. The local doctor in town, Dr. Sarah Williams, delivered news that shocked her even more. She was carrying quadruplets. 4 babies. Elena had no idea how she would manage, but she was determined to keep them. She had grown up without a father and knew the pain of an incomplete family. These children would have their mother's love even if their father remained unaware of their existence. Elena managed to hide her pregnancy for months with loose clothing and careful positioning. The other staff members noticed she had gained weight, but assumed it was from eating too much of Cook's delicious food. As her belly grew larger, hiding became more difficult. But Elena was resourceful. She rearranged her work schedule to clean areas where she was less likely to encounter other people, and she always wore her largest apron. On this particular November night, Elena was in the nursery on the 3rd floor, a room that hadn't been used in years. The previous owner of the mansion had children, and the room still contained beautiful antique cribs and toys. Elena often found herself drawn to this room, imagining what it would be like when her own babies arrived. She was 7 months pregnant now, and Dr. Williams had warned her that quadruplets often arrived early. As Elena dusted the windowsill, she felt a sharp pain in her lower back. She had been experiencing these pains more frequently lately, but Dr. Williams had said they were normal. Elena continued working, humming softly to herself as she often did. The babies seemed to respond to her voice, moving gently when she sang the lullabies her own mother had sung to her as a child. The mansion was particularly quiet tonight. Mr. Algol. Blackwood had left for a business trip to London 3 days ago and wasn't expected back for another week. His absence always made the house feel different, less tense, more relaxed. The other staff members would laugh more freely and take longer breaks when the master of the house was away. Eleanor was reaching to dust a high shelf when another sharp pain hit her. Stronger this time. She gripped the edge of the changing table and breathed deeply, waiting for it to pass. As the pain subsided, she noticed something that made her freeze with fear. A wet warmth spreading down her legs. Her water had broken. Panic surged through Elena as she realized she was going into labor, alone in the mansion with only a skeleton crew of night staff. The nearest hospital was 30 minutes away, and she didn't have a car. Her friend Maria had left for the evening, and the security guard, James Patterson, was making his rounds on the other side of the property. Elena managed to make her way to the small staff bathroom adjacent to the nursery. The contractions were coming faster now, and she knew with growing certainty that these babies were not going to wait for a hospital delivery. She had heard stories of women giving birth unexpectedly, but she never imagined it would happen to her, especially not with 4 babies. Using towels from the linen closet, Elena tried to make herself as comfortable as possible on the bathroom floor. She had taken some basic first aid courses when she first started working at the mansion, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The pain was overwhelming, but Elena forced herself to stay calm for the sake of her children. The first baby arrived after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes. A tiny girl with dark hair and the strongest cry Elena had ever heard. Elena wrapped her daughter in a clean towel and placed her gently in the empty laundry basket she had lined with soft linens. The second baby, another girl, arrived 20 minutes later. Then a boy, followed by his brother. 4 perfect, tiny human beings lay in the makeshift nursery Elena had created in the bathroom. They were small but appeared healthy, their cries filling the previously silent mansion with the sound of new life. Elena was exhausted but filled with an indescribable love as she looked at her children. Sophia, Isabella, Diego, and Miguel, names she had chosen months ago while dreaming of this moment. Elena knew she needed medical attention for both herself and the babies, but she was afraid. What would happen to her job? How would she explain this to Mr. Blackwood when he returned? Would she be fired and forced to leave the country before she could properly care for her children? As these thoughts raced through her mind, Elena heard something that made her blood run cold. The distinctive sound of Mr. Blackwood's car pulling up the long driveway. The headlights swept across the windows of the third floor, and Elena realized with growing horror that he had returned early from his trip. Elena could hear James, the security guard, greeting Mr. Blackwood at the front entrance. Their voices carried up through the mansion's grand staircase, and Elena strained to listen while trying to keep the babies quiet. She heard Mr. Blackwood asking about the staff, whether everything had been normal in his absence. James mentioned that everyone had been working their regular shifts and that there had been no problems. The sound of footsteps on the marble staircase grew louder as Mr. Blackwood made his way up to his private office on the third floor. Elena realized with terror that he would have to pass directly by the nursery to reach his office. She gathered the babies as carefully as she could, wrapping them in towels and holding them close to her chest. Elena's mind raced with possibilities. She could try to sneak down the back stairs to the servants' quarters, but the babies might cry and alert Mr. Blackwood to their presence. She could hide in the nursery closet until he went to his office. But what if he decided to check the unused rooms? She could try to explain everything, but how do you tell your employer that you've just given birth to quadruplets in his mansion without him knowing you were pregnant? The footsteps stopped directly outside the nursery door. Elena held her breath, trying to will the babies to remain silent. For a moment, there was complete quiet. Then she heard the door handle turn slowly, and the door creaked open. Mr. Blackwood stepped into the room, still wearing his expensive black suit from his flight. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from travel, and he looked tired. He reached for the light switch, and Elena knew there was nowhere to hide. The room flooded with warm light from the antique chandelier, and Alexander Blackwood found himself staring at a scene he never could have imagined. Elena Martinez, the quiet night maid he barely knew, was sitting on the floor beside the old changing table, holding 4 tiny babies in her arms. Her work uniform was wrinkled and stained. Her dark hair had escaped from its usual neat bun, and she looked up at him with eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander's business mind, trained to quickly process unexpected situations, struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. The practical questions came first. When had she been pregnant? Where had the babies come from? Why was she in the nursery? But as he looked more closely at the 4 tiny faces peeking out from the towels, Alexander felt something shift in his chest. There was something familiar about their features. Something that made him take a step closer rather than demand an explanation. Elena finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Blackwood, I can explain. Please don't call the police. I know I should have told someone, but I was scared. I needed this job, and I didn't know what would happen if you found out. Alexander held up a hand to stop her nervous rambling. His eyes moved from Elena's face to the babies and back again. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? The gentle concern in his voice surprised Elena. She had expected anger, demands for explanations, immediate termination. Instead, he seemed genuinely worried about her well-being. I think I'm okay, Elena replied, though she wasn't entirely sure. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and she was feeling weak and dizzy. But the babies, they're so small. They should probably see a doctor. Alexander pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Dr. Williams, this is Alexander Blackwood. I need you to come to the mansion immediately. We have a medical situation. Yes, it's urgent. 4 newborns and their mother. No, I'll explain when you get here. As he ended the call, Alexander looked back at Elena. Something was nagging at him, a memory just out of reach. The baby's features, Elena's nervous behavior over the past few months that he had attributed to shyness, the timing. Elena, he said softly, kneeling down to get a closer look at the children. I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. When did this happen? When were these babies conceived? Elena's cheeks flushed red, and she looked down at the babies rather than meeting his eyes. The staff party, she whispered. In February. I know it was wrong, and I know you probably don't remember. But the memory hit Alexander like a physical blow. The staff anniversary party. He had been going through a difficult divorce. His ex-wife had been particularly vindictive that week, and he had drunk more than usual. He remembered talking to Elena in the garden, being struck by her kindness and genuine nature, in contrast to the artificial people he usually dealt with in his business world. He remembered thinking she was beautiful, not in the polished way of the women he typically dated, but in a natural, honest way that drew him in. He remembered walking her to one of the guest rooms because she had seemed unsteady on her feet. He remembered gentle conversation, the way she had listened to him talk about his loneliness and the pressure of his business empire. And he remembered crossing a line that he had never intended to cross with an employee, driven by loneliness and alcohol and her unexpected understanding. The next morning, he had been horrified by his behavior. Elena had been gone when he woke up, and he had convinced himself that maybe nothing had happened, that maybe they had both just been too drunk and had fallen asleep in the same room. He had been too embarrassed and confused to bring it up with her, and she had gone back to avoiding him as she always had. Now, looking at these 4 tiny faces, Alexander saw features that were unmistakably familiar. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their small mouths. Even the way the little boy on the left was curling his tiny fist exactly the way Alexander did when he was thinking. "These are my children," Alexander said, the words coming out as a statement rather than a question. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared you would think I was trying to trap you or get money from you. I just wanted to raise them myself and not cause any trouble." Alexander reached out tentatively, and Elena shifted one of the babies so he could see her more clearly. The little girl opened her eyes and looked directly at him, and Alexander felt something he had never experienced before. An instant, overwhelming love that seemed to fill every empty space in his chest. "What are their names?" he asked. "Sophia, Isabella, Diego, and Miguel," Elena replied, pointing to each baby as she said their names. Alexander repeated the names softly, as if testing how they felt in his mouth. These were his children. He was a father to 4 beautiful babies, and he had almost missed their birth entirely. Dr. Williams arrived 20 minutes later, followed by 2 nurses with portable equipment. She examined both Elena and the babies with professional efficiency, pronouncing them all remarkably healthy considering the circumstances. "The babies are small, as expected with quadruplets, but they appear to be breathing well and their reflexes are good," Dr. Williams explained. "Elena, you did an amazing job delivering them safely. However, I'd like to take everyone to the hospital for proper monitoring, at least for tonight." As the medical team prepared to transport Elena and the babies, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. "I'm coming with you," he told Elena. "These are my children too, and I want to make sure you're all properly cared for." Elena looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You don't have to do that. I know this complicates everything for you." Alexander took her hand gently. "Eleanor, I may not have known about them before tonight, but these babies are the most important thing that has ever happened to me. We need to talk about a lot of things, but right now, all that matters is making sure you and they are safe and healthy." As they prepared to leave the mansion, Alexander looked back at the nursery one more time. A few hours ago, it had been nothing but a dusty reminder of the previous owners. Now it represented possibility, family, a future he had never dared to imagine. Elena settled into the ambulance with the 4 babies, still hardly believing that Alexander had not only accepted them, but seemed genuinely happy about their existence. She had spent months terrified of this moment, and instead of the disaster she had imagined, she felt the first stirring of hope that maybe, just maybe, these children might have the complete family she had always dreamed of giving them. Alexander rode in his car behind the ambulance, his mind reeling with the implications of the night's events. He was a father, not just to 1 child, but to 4. Elena, the quiet woman he had barely noticed for 3 years, was the mother of his children. His entire life had changed in the space of an hour. As the convoy made its way through the quiet streets toward the hospital, Alexander found himself thinking not about the complications this would cause in his business or his social life, but about the way little Sophia had looked at him with those serious dark eyes, as if she already knew he was her father and was deciding whether or not to approve of him. The next morning brought a chaos that Alexander Blackwood had never experienced in his carefully controlled life. The private wing of Millbrook General Hospital buzzed with activity, as nurses, doctors, and specialists came and went from Elena's room, where the 4 babies were being monitored in state-of-the-art incubators that Alexander had insisted on having brought in. Dr. Williams had spent the early morning hours running comprehensive tests on all 4 babies. Despite being born at 33 weeks, Sophia, Isabella, Diego, and Miguel were remarkably healthy. Their birth weights ranged from 3 pounds, 2 ounces, to 4 pounds, 1 ounce. And their lung function was better than expected for babies born at their gestational age. Elena had barely slept, not because of pain or discomfort, but because she couldn't stop watching Alexander interact with their children. Every few minutes, throughout the night, he would walk over to one of the incubators and speak softly to the baby inside. He had removed his expensive suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and Elena was struck by how natural he looked as a father, despite having only learned of their existence hours earlier. Around 7 in the morning, Alexander's personal assistant, Catherine Hayes, arrived at the hospital looking frazzled and confused. Catherine had worked for Alexander for 8 years and prided herself on knowing every detail of his life and business. The emergency phone call she had received at 5 a.m., instructing her to clear his schedule for the next week and arrange for several specialists to consult on newborn care, had left her completely bewildered. "Mr. Blackwood," Catherine said as she approached him in the hallway outside Elena's room, "I've cancelled your meetings with the Tokyo investors and postponed the hotel opening in Miami as you requested. But I have to ask, what exactly is the emergency?" "Are you ill?" Alexander looked at Catherine, realizing he was about to share news that would shock not just her but his entire professional and social circle.
"Catherine, I need you to sit down for this."
They found a quiet corner in the hospital waiting area, and Alexander explained the events of the previous night. Catherine's expression changed from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic as she processed the information.
"You have 4 babies?" Catherine repeated, as if saying it out loud would help her understand.
"With Elena from the cleaning staff? And they were born last night in the mansion?"
"They're my children, Catherine," Alexander said firmly.
"And Elena isn't just cleaning staff. She's their mother, and that makes her incredibly important." Catherine's professional instincts kicked in despite her shock. "Okay, we need to control this narrative before the media gets hold of it. Your divorce from Victoria was front-page news for weeks. If reporters find out you have secret quadruplets with a maid..." "Stop," Alexander interrupted. "These aren't secret quadruplets, and Elena isn't a maid in the way you're thinking. These are my children, and I'm going to be involved in their lives. We're not hiding anything or controlling any narratives." Catherine stared at her boss, realizing that something fundamental had changed in him overnight. In all her years working for Alexander Blackwood, she had never seen him speak with such protective intensity about anything or anyone. Meanwhile, back in Elena's hospital room, she was having her own difficult conversation with her friend Maria, who had arrived as soon as she heard the news from James, the security guard. "Elena, I can't believe you hid this from me for 9 months, Maria said, shaking her head as she looked at the 4 babies. "And Mr. Phil, Blackwood is really their father? Our boss? The man who barely says hello when he passes us in the hallway? He's different than we thought," Elena said quietly. "Last night, when he found us, he wasn't angry. He was kind, concerned. And the way he looks at them, Maria, he really wants to be their father." Maria, who had been Elena's closest friend since they both started working at the mansion, was worried. "Elena, you know I care about you like a sister, but you have to be careful. Rich men like Mr. Blackwood, they live in a different world. What happens when the novelty wears off? What happens when his fancy friends find out about this?" Before Elena could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Alexander entered, followed by an elegant woman in her 50s whom Elena didn't recognize. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Dr. Paulson." "Jennifer Morrison," Alexander said. "She's one of the best pediatric specialists in the state, and she's agreed to oversee the baby's care." Dr. Morrison approached Elena with a warm smile. "Congratulations, my dear. Mr. Blackwood has told me what an extraordinary job you did delivering these beautiful children. I've reviewed all their test results, and I'm very pleased with how well they're doing." Elena felt overwhelmed by the level of care Alexander was arranging. In Colombia, she had grown up with basic medical care at best. The idea of having the state's top pediatric specialist caring for her babies felt surreal. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena said hesitantly, "this must be very expensive. I can't pay for this level of care." Alexander pulled a chair beside her bed. "Elena, these are our children. Money is not a concern when it comes to their health and well-being. But I want you to know that I'm not doing this to control you or them. I want to be involved because I want to be their father, not because I feel obligated." Dr. Morrison spent the next hour examining each baby and explaining their care plan to both Elena and Alexander. She recommended that they stay in the hospital for at least a week to monitor their development and ensure they were feeding properly. The good news, Doctor, Morrison concluded, is that these babies are fighters. Quadruplets born at 33 weeks often face significant challenges, but your 4 are showing remarkable resilience. After Dr. Bryan, Morrison left, Alexander and Elena found themselves alone with the babies for the first time since the previous night. The morning sunshine streamed through the hospital room windows, casting a golden light over the 4 incubators. Elena, we need to talk about what happens next, Alexander said gently. I want to be clear about my intentions. These children are mine, and I want to be a real father to them. But I also want to make sure you feel comfortable with whatever arrangements we make. Elena had been dreading this conversation, but also needing it. What kind of arrangements? First, you'll never have to worry about money again. I want to set up trust funds for each of the children, and I want to make sure you have everything you need to care for them properly. Second, I'd like you to consider moving into the main house at the mansion. The east wing has a beautiful suite that could be converted into a family area. Elena's eyes widened. You want us to live in the mansion? With you? I want to be part of their daily lives, Alexander explained. I want to be there for bedtime stories and midnight feedings and first words. I missed their birth by mere minutes. I don't want to miss anything else. The offer was more than Elena had ever dared to hope for, but it also terrified her. Alexander, I'm grateful for everything you're doing, but I need you to understand something. I won't be your employee anymore if we do this. I won't be the maid who lives upstairs with your children. If we're going to be a family, even an unconventional one, we need to be equals in raising them. Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry. I'm still thinking like a businessman instead of a father. What would make you comfortable? I want to contribute, Elena said. I have a degree in early childhood education from Columbia that was never recognized here, which is why I was cleaning houses. If I'm going to live in your mansion, I want to be there as the mother of your children and as someone who contributes to the household, not as someone who is kept by you. Alexander felt a surge of respect for Elena that he hadn't expected. Even in this vulnerable situation, she was maintaining her dignity and independence.
What if you managed the children's education and development? He suggested.
I could hire tutors and teachers to work under your direction. You could create and oversee their entire early learning program. Elena's face lit up with the first genuine smile Alexander had seen from her since the previous night. I would love that. I've always dreamed of working with children in a meaningful way. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Through the window, Aylin could see several people with cameras and notepads gathering near the elevator. Alexander noticed them too and swore under his breath. God! The media found out. Catherine must not have been able to contain this after all. A hospital administrator knocked on the door and entered looking apologetic. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry, but we have reporters asking questions at the front desk. They somehow learned about the babies being born here. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. What will they say about me? About the children? Alexander stood up, his business persona reasserting itself. They won't say anything because they won't get any information. Elena, I want you to stay here with the babies. I'm going to handle this. But before Alexander could leave the room, his ex-wife Victoria Blackwood swept in, followed by her lawyer, Martin Cross. Victoria was a stunning blonde woman in her early 30s, dressed in an expensive designer outfit that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. Well, well, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Alexander, darling, imagine my surprise when I read about your new family in this morning's society blog. 4 babies, with the help, how? Quaint. Elena felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but Alexander stepped protectively between Victoria and the hospital bed. Victoria, you need to leave, now. Oh, I don't think so, Victoria replied, examining her perfectly manicured nails. You see, our divorce settlement included clauses about any children you might have. If these babies are really yours, then I'm entitled to a review of our financial arrangements. Martin Cross stepped forward with a briefcase. Mr. Blackwood, my client has legitimate concerns about how these new developments might affect her settlement agreement. Alexander's voice became deadly quiet, a tone that Elena had never heard, but that made her understand why people called him the Night King.
If you think you can use my children as leverage for more money, you're making a serious mistake.
Victoria walked closer to the incubators, peering at the babies with theatrical curiosity. They're so tiny, aren't they? Premature babies can have so many problems. It must be such a burden for you, Alexander. All that medical care, the special needs they might have. And their mother, Victoria, turned to look at Elena with undisguised disdain. She must feel so out of her depth in your world.
Elena had remained quiet through this exchange, but Victoria's words triggered something protective and fierce in her.
She stood up from the hospital bed, ignoring the soreness in her body.
You're right,
Elena said calmly, addressing Victoria directly. I am out of my depth in Alexander's world. I don't know about society blogs or financial settlements or designer clothes. But I know about love, and I know about family, and I know that those 4 babies are the most precious things in this room.
Victoria laughed, but there was something sharp and unpleasant about the sound.
How refreshing. The help thinks she understands family. That's enough. Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Victoria, you have 30 seconds to leave this room before I call security. And Martin, if you think you can use my children's birth to renegotiate a divorce settlement that was finalized 6 months ago, you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of a very expensive legal battle.
Victoria realized that Alexander was not going to be intimidated.
She had never seen him so protective of anything, and she understood that these babies had changed something fundamental in him. This isn't over, Alexander, Victoria said as she headed for the door. I meant what I said about the settlement review. And when word gets out about your little family situation, don't expect everyone to be as understanding as you hope. After Victoria and her lawyer left, Elena sank back onto the hospital bed, feeling emotionally drained. The confrontation had made her realize how complicated Alexander's world really was, and how difficult it might be for her and the babies to fit into it. I'm sorry about that, Alexander said, sitting beside her bed again. Victoria is vindictive. She's never been able to accept that our marriage was over. Is what she said true? Elena asked. About the settlement and the legal complications? Alexander was quiet for a moment. There might be some legal challenges, but nothing that can't be handled. What concerns me more is how you're feeling about all this.
Victoria was cruel to you, and I should have prevented that.
Elena looked at the 4 babies, sleeping peacefully in their incubators despite the chaos that had surrounded them.
Alexander, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me.
Of course.
Are you going to get tired of this? When the novelty wears off, when the media attention becomes too much, when your business associates start treating you differently because of us? Are you going to decide that being a father to 4 babies with a woman from a completely different background is more trouble than it's worth? Alexander was quiet for a long time, considering her question.
When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Elena had ever heard it.
Elena, I've spent my entire adult life building a business empire, accumulating wealth and power and influence.
I've had relationships with women who wanted me for my money, and I've had business partnerships with people who only cared about what I could do for them. I've been married to someone who saw me as a trophy and a source of financial security. He paused, looking at their sleeping children. But last night, when I walked into that nursery and saw you with our babies, I felt something I had never experienced before. Not obligation, not duty, not even just love, but completeness. Like I had been living my whole life with a piece missing, and suddenly it was there. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. I can't promise you that the outside world won't be complicated, Alexander continued. I can't promise that there won't be challenges or people who don't approve or media attention that makes things difficult, but I can promise you that I will never get tired of being their father, and I will never see you as anything less than the woman who gave me the most important gift of my life. As if responding to their father's words, baby Diego began to fuss in his incubator. Alexander stood up and walked over to the baby, speaking softly until Diego settled back to sleep. Elena watched this interaction and felt something she had been afraid to acknowledge. She was falling in love with Alexander Blackwood. Not with his money or his power or his mansion, but with the gentle way he spoke to their children, and the protective way he had stood up to his ex-wife, and the genuine emotion in his voice when he talked about becoming a father. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had entered into this situation hoping only that he would accept the children and perhaps provide some financial support. She had never imagined that she might have feelings for him, or that he might come to care for her as more than just the mother of his children. Outside the hospital room, the media attention was growing. Catherine Hayes was fielding phone calls from reporters, business associates, and social acquaintances who had heard rumors about Alexander's new family. The story was spreading quickly through both traditional media and social networks. But inside the quiet hospital room, Elena and Alexander sat together watching their 4 children sleep, both of them beginning to understand that their lives had been forever changed, not just by the births of Sophia, Isabella, Diego, and Miguel, but by the unexpected connection they were discovering with each other. The afternoon brought another surprise visitor. Elena's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rosa Gutierrez, who had driven 3 hours from Elena's small apartment in the city, after hearing about the babies from Maria. "Mija," Mrs. Gutierrez said, embracing Elena carefully. "I had to come see these beautiful babies. Maria told me what happened, but I had to see with my own eyes that you and the little ones are safe." Mrs. Gutierrez had been like a grandmother to Elena since she arrived in the United States. Elena had told her about the pregnancy but had sworn her to secrecy about the father's identity. Alexander watched the warm interaction between Elena and the older woman, seeing yet another side of the woman who had given birth to his children. Mrs. Gutierrez treated Elena like family, fussing over her comfort and cooing over the babies with genuine affection. "And you must be Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Gutierrez said, turning to Alexander with sharp, assessing eyes. "Elena told me you were the father of these babies." "Yes, ma'am," Alexander replied, something about the older woman's dignity making him feel like he should stand up straighter. "Mrs. Reynolds." Gutierrez studied him for a moment. "Elena is like a daughter to me, Mr. Powell." "Blackwood. She is a good girl with a pure heart. These babies are lucky to have her as their mother." "I agree completely," Alexander said. "They're lucky to have her, and so am I." Mrs. Gutierrez nodded approvingly. "Good answer. You treat her with respect, and you will have my blessing. You hurt her or those babies, and you will answer to me." Despite everything that had happened in the past 24 hours, Elena found herself smiling at the sight of one of the most powerful businessmen in the country being gently threatened by her elderly neighbor. As the day wore on, Elena and Alexander fell into a natural rhythm of caring for the babies together. They took turns feeding them, changing them, and simply sitting beside the incubators talking to them. Alexander had an intuitive understanding of what each baby needed, as if he had been caring for them their entire lives rather than just discovering their existence the night before. When visiting hours ended and the hospital grew quiet, Alexander made a decision that surprised even him. "Elena, would it be all right if I stayed here tonight? I can sleep in the chair. I don't want to leave them." "Or you?" Elena felt her heart skip at his words. "Of course you can stay. They should have both their parents here." As they settled in for their second night as a family, Elena realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, legal battles with Victoria, media scrutiny, the complications of blending their very different backgrounds, she was no longer facing them alone. Alexander pulled his chair close to her hospital bed, and they sat together in the dim light, watching over their 4 sleeping children and beginning to imagine what their future might look like together. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in what had once been the formal dining room of Blackwood Mansion, watching contractors transform the space into a beautiful nursery for the Quadruplets. True to his word, Alexander had converted the entire east wing of the mansion into a family living area, complete with a master bedroom for Elena, individual nursery spaces for each baby, a playroom, and a private kitchen where Elena could prepare the children's meals as they grew older. The transformation wasn't just physical. Elena had traded her maid's uniform for comfortable clothes that allowed her to chase after 4 increasingly active babies. Her hair, which she had always worn in a tight, practical bun, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Alexander had hired a team of specialists to help with the baby's care, but he insisted that all major decisions about their upbringing be made jointly by him and Elena. Morrison had been amazed by how quickly Sophia, Isabella, Diego, and Miguel had thrived after leaving the hospital. At their 3-week checkup, all 4 babies were gaining weight steadily and meeting every developmental milestone. Diego had been the first to smile, melting Alexander's heart completely when he grinned during a diaper change. Isabella was the most vocal, letting everyone know exactly when she was hungry or tired. Sophia was the observer, watching everything with serious dark eyes that reminded everyone of her father. Miguel was the charmer, seeming to flirt with every nurse and doctor who examined him. The media attention had been intense for the first week after the story broke, but Alexander's legal team had managed to control the narrative by focusing on the positive aspects: a successful businessman embracing fatherhood, the miracle of healthy quadruplets, the heartwarming story of an unexpected family. Victoria's attempts to create negative publicity had backfired when her lawyer's challenge to the divorce settlement was thrown out of court for lack of merit. Elena was in the new nursery, feeding Miguel, while Alexander sat in the rocking chair beside her with Sophia, when Catherine Hayes knocked on the open door. "Mr. Blackwood, I have the final contracts from the Denver Hotel project and the board meeting materials for next week," Catherine said, then paused as she watched Alexander gently burp the baby on his shoulder. In the 3 weeks since the baby's birth, Catherine had watched her boss transform from a driven, sometimes ruthless businessman into a man who scheduled conference calls around feeding times and insisted that all important meetings include virtual participation options so he could be home with his family. "Leave the contracts on my desk upstairs," Alexander said without taking his eyes off Sophia, and pushed the board meeting to Thursday afternoon. "Diego has his first physical therapy appointment on Tuesday, and I don't want to miss it." Diego had been born with a slightly twisted foot, a common condition in multiple births that required gentle physical therapy to correct. Alexander had insisted on learning all the exercises himself so he could help with Diego's treatment at home. Catherine nodded and left, still marveling at the change in her employer. The merger deals and hotel openings that had once been his sole focus now took second place to diaper changes and baby schedules. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked Alexander that evening as they sat together on the sofa in their private living room, each holding 2 sleeping babies. "Changing your whole life so dramatically for us?" Alexander looked at her as if she had asked whether he regretted breathing. "Elena, do you know what my life was like before that night I found you in the nursery?" Elena shook her head. "I woke up every morning in a house that felt like a museum. I ate breakfast alone while reading business reports. I spent my days in meetings with people who only cared about profit margins and market share. I came home to silence, ate dinner alone, and went to bed alone. I had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered." He looked down at Isabella and Miguel, sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Now I wake up to baby sounds, sometimes crying, sometimes just the soft breathing of 4 little people who depend on me. I eat breakfast while you tell me funny things they did during the night. I spend my days looking forward to coming home to chaos and laughter and the smell of baby powder. I go to bed exhausted but completely fulfilled." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. Over the past 3 weeks, she had watched Alexander become not just a devoted father, but also a caring partner to her. He consulted her on every decision, respected her opinions about the children's care, and treated her as an equal in every way. "There's something I need to tell you," Elena said softly. "Something I should have said earlier." Alexander shifted the babies carefully so he could give Elena his full attention. "I'm falling in love with you," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because of the mansion or the security you've given us, but because of who you are with them, with me. I see the way you read to Sophia even though she's too young to understand. I see how patient you are when Diego cries during his therapy. I see how you make funny faces to make Isabella laugh. And I see how you look at me like I'm the most important person in your world." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Elena began to worry that she had misread the situation, that she had confused his devotion to the children with feelings for her. Then he spoke, his voice filled with emotion. "Elena, I fell in love with you the night I found you in that nursery. Not just because you had given me 4 beautiful children, but because of your courage. You delivered 4 babies alone, in a strange place, and your first concern wasn't for yourself but for their well-being. You stood up to Victoria when she tried to intimidate you. You insisted on maintaining your dignity even when I was offering you everything money could buy."
He paused, looking at their sleeping children. "I've been afraid to tell you how I felt because I didn't want you to think I was just trying to create some fantasy family to make myself feel better about missing their birth and their first days. But Elena, what I feel for you isn't about the babies. It's about you. Your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, the way you hum while you're feeding them, the way you worry about whether they're too warm or too cold, the way you've never once asked me for anything but have given me everything." Elena leaned over carefully and kissed him, a soft, gentle kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Elena's mother, Carmen Martinez, arrived from Colombia with 2 suitcases and a determined expression on her face. Elena had been able to bring her mother to visit using Alexander's private jet, something that would have been impossible before. "Mija,
Carmen said, embracing Elena carefully while looking over her shoulder at the 4 babies in their bouncy seats. I had to come meet my grandbabies and see this new life you have built. Carmen was a small, dignified woman in her 60s, who had worked as a seamstress her entire life to support Elena's education. She spoke limited English, but her warmth and grandmother instincts transcended language barriers. Alexander, who had been learning basic Spanish to communicate better with Elena's family and friends, greeted Carmen in her native language. Señora Martínez, bienvenida a nuestra casa. Estamos muy felices de conocerla. Carmen's face lit up at his effort, and Elena translated the more complex parts of their conversation. By the end of the first day, Carmen was treating Alexander like a son, fussing over him the same way she fussed over Elena and the babies.
Your mother likes him, Maria observed to Elena, as they watched Carmen teach Alexander how to properly swaddle Miguel.
That's a good sign. Your mama never liked any of the boys you dated in Colombia. He's not like anyone I ever dated, Elena replied, watching Alexander patiently practice the swaddling technique until Carmen nodded her approval.
He's extraordinary.
2 months after the baby's birth, Alexander made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. During the monthly board meeting of Blackwood Industries, he announced that he was stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on his family. I'll remain as chairman of the board, he explained to the stunned executives. But I'm promoting James Morrison to CEO. The company is strong, our management team is excellent, and I want to be present for my children's early years in a way that constant travel and long work hours won't allow. The business world was shocked by the announcement. Alexander Blackwood had built his empire through relentless focus and personal involvement in every major decision. The idea of him stepping back to be a hands-on father was unprecedented, but for Alexander, the decision felt completely natural. He had discovered that success measured in dollars and market share paled in comparison to the satisfaction of helping Diego take his first steps, or hearing Isabella say, "Dada," for the first time. Elena had initially worried about Alexander giving up so much of his business focus for them, but she gradually realized that he wasn't giving anything up. He was gaining something he had never known he wanted. The family settled into a routine that worked for everyone. Elena managed the children's education and development programs, working with tutors and specialists that Alexander hired, but letting Elena direct their activities. Alexander handled the business side of their lives but remained intimately involved in every aspect of childcare. Carmen decided to stay in the United States permanently, moving into a beautiful cottage on the mansion grounds where she could be close to her grandbabies but still maintain her independence. She became the family's unofficial grandmother, teaching the children Spanish lullabies and cooking traditional Colombian meals that reminded Elena of home. By the time Sofia, Isabella, Diego, and Miguel reached their first birthday, they were thriving in ways that amazed everyone who met them. Sofia was walking and had an extensive vocabulary for a 1-year-old. Isabella was the athlete of the group, climbing everything she could reach and showing no fear of new challenges. Diego's foot had healed completely, and he was the musician, always gravitating toward any toy that made noise. Miguel was the socialite, charming everyone he met with his ready smile and outgoing personality. The first birthday party was held in the mansion's gardens, with decorations in soft pastels and a guest list that included everyone who had become important in the children's lives. Dr. Morrison, Mrs.
Gutierrez, Catherine Hayes, the nurses from the hospital, and Maria and her family.
As Elena watched Alexander help each child blow out their birthday candles, she reflected on how completely their lives had changed.
A year ago, she had been a single woman cleaning houses and dreaming of returning to Colombia. Now she was part of a family she had never dared to imagine. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, joining her on the garden bench where she had been watching the festivities. "Just marveling at how different life can be from what you expect," Elena replied. "A year ago, if someone had told me I would be living in a mansion with 4 children and falling asleep next to you every night, I would have thought they were crazy." Alexander took her hand, a gesture that had become natural for them over the months. "Speaking of falling asleep next to me every night," he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Elena's heart began to race. "Elena Martinez," Alexander said, getting down on one knee in front of the bench while their 4 children played nearby. "You gave me the greatest gifts of my life, not just our beautiful children, but also the chance to become the man I never knew I could be. Will you marry me?" Elena looked at the ring, a beautiful diamond surrounded by 4 smaller stones representing their children, and then at Alexander's face. which showed both confidence and vulnerability. "Yes," she said simply, and Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger while their friends and family cheered around them. As they kissed, Sophia toddled over and pulled on Alexander's pant leg, demanding attention. He scooped her up while Elena gathered Isabella, and soon all 4 children were clustered around their parents, creating the kind of family moment that Elena had dreamed of her entire life. The wedding took place 3 months later in the mansion's gardens, with the Quadruplets serving as the world's youngest bridal party. Sophia and Isabella wore tiny white dresses and scattered flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Diego and Miguel wore miniature versions of their father's tuxedo and charmed everyone by clapping at inappropriate moments during the ceremony. Elena wore her mother's wedding dress, which Carmen had carefully altered to fit her perfectly. Alexander's eyes filled with tears when he saw her walking down the aisle between the rose gardens, carrying a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. The ceremony was small and intimate, including only the people who had become their chosen family. Dr. Morrison served as Elena's matron of honor, while Alexander's business partner James Morrison stood as his best man. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the Quadruplets began to clap and babble excitedly, as if they understood that this ceremony made official what had already become true in their hearts. They were a family. As the sun set over their wedding reception, Elena and Alexander danced to a Spanish love song that Carmen had taught them, while their 4 children played with their grandmothers on a blanket nearby. "Do you think they'll remember any of this?" Elena asked, looking at Sophia. "Isabella, Diego, and Miguel?" "They won't remember the wedding," Alexander replied, "but they'll grow up knowing that their parents chose each other and chose this family. They'll know that love doesn't always happen the way you expect it to, but when it does happen, it can change everything." Elena leaned her head against Alexander's shoulder as they swayed to the music, surrounded by the laughter of their children and the warmth of the people they loved. 2 years later, Elena would publish a children's book about 4 baby birds who found their way to the perfect nest, inspired by her own children's story. Alexander would discover a passion for philanthropy, focusing on programs that supported single mothers and early childhood education. Sophia would become fluent in 3 languages by age 4. Isabella would win her first gymnastics competition at age 5. Diego would compose his first song at age 6. Miguel would organize his first charity fundraiser at age 7. But on this perfect evening, with their children playing at their feet and their future stretching out before them like an endless garden, Elena and Alexander simply danced and marveled at the beautiful unpredictability of love. The Night King had found his queen, and she had given him not just a kingdom, but a home filled with the kind of joy that no amount of money could ever buy. What Elena had witnessed when Alexander first saw his children had indeed stunned her, not because he rejected them, as she had feared, but because she saw a powerful man transformed by love into something even more powerful, a devoted father and husband who understood that the greatest success in life wasn't measured in business accomplishments, but in the laughter of children and the love of family. As the stars appeared overhead and their children finally began to yawn with exhaustion, Elena and Alexander gathered Sophia, Isabella, Diego, and Miguel in their arms and walked together toward the mansion that had become their sanctuary, their home, and the place where their unexpected love story continued to unfold with each passing day.